Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third day of BCBT 2021. Today we start a new session, a session on neurorehabilitation, and we start the program with a little introduction to a very important project that we are running in collaboration with several clinics and hospitals in Europe, and with important collaborators such as Medtronic and Iodine that are bringing, let's say, this system, the system that is developed within the project, to the European market. So I'm very happy today to introduce this project that is called RGS at Home. And so this will last for the morning session until 12, where we will have two more lectures coming from relevant clinicians from Italy and Spain. And they will talk to us about neurorehabilitation systems and programs used in their hospitals. And so, but without further ado, I would like to then present Irina Gomez and Melero Cristina that from Medtronic. They will introduce the RGS at Home project, as well, followed up by Belén Rubio Ballester. They will talk to us about the science of this type of system, and followed by a demo by from Iodine, Santiago Brandi, that will show us how the system works. So, Irina, then I give you the floor and take it away.
Okay. Okay, so I will share my screen. Okay. Okay. Are you looking my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much, Anna, for preparing these sessions that give us the opportunity to introduce a very interesting European project, like it is this one, RGS at Home, a neurorehabilitation gaming system. As Anna said, my name is Irina Gomez Ortiz, and I work in Medtronic as a business analyst consultant in the healthcare sector, together with Cristina Melero, a project coordinator also from Medtronic, and Belén Rubio Ballester, a research scientific from IBEC, and Santiago Brandi, Chief Product Officer from Iodine. We are going to introduce this very interesting project. Okay. So, no pasa, no me está ahora, sorry. Okay, during this session, we will introduce the RGS at Home solution and the project. Belén will see the results that we have obtained from the test of the solution with real patients and professionals. Santiago will do a small demo of the solution, and finally Cristina will end up seeing the opinion with of both professionals and patients. Okay, so I don't know why it's not passing well. So what is RGS Home Project? Okay, so RGS is a smart solution for personalized neurorehabilitation therapy for patients with motor and cognitive deficits resulting from neurological conditions, spinal cord damage, and brain injuries. The solution helps a patient with affordable rehabilitation while allowing to increase the intensity of the therapy and the autonomy with more sessions at any time from home. This is very important to try to extend this therapy and more in the beginning of the treatment. Thus, with this also, the patient at the end is at the center of the rehabilitation process. The solution also helps clinical professionals increase efficiency, monitoring several, also they can monitor several patients in remote with a good overview of the progress through the means a medical information monitoring system. And finally, the solution helps hospitals and rehabilitation clinics, physiotherapists, and other professionals access to an innovative solution which reduce cost and increase efficiency, okay, and also increase the capacity. One of the main problems faced by patients who need neurorehabilitation is the discontinuity of care. For example, if we have a patient who has suffered a stroke, he is stable, begins the rehabilitation in the hospital. But when he is discharged, he has to wait 2 to 3 months until he can start neurorehabilitation treatment. This gap in treatment negatively impacts on the patient capacity to recover, and in fact, patients often lose the previous achieved progress in the hospital. So they lose what they learn in the hospital. RGS at home is an evolution of the RGS clinic, okay, which is the neurorehabilitation solution for hospital. Thus, the solution RGS offers a therapeutic continuum for patients, allowing them to train from home in a more affordable and practical way while increasing adherence to treatment and autonomy, and thus their recovery speed. Okay. Currently, this solution is spreading to wearables. In this way, from hospital to homes, patients can train with an RGS product. Even when the patient has recovered, RGS Wear and RGS app can help them keeping a healthy and active lifestyles. This RGS product ecosystem allowed both patient and professional access to recovery data from day one of treatment, with RGS in one single data ecosystem that offers a good overview of progress through the medical information monitoring system means. This is very useful for professionals in order to adapt the prescription to new training session and intensity according to the patient conditions, and for patients that is help them staying motivated and adherence to their treatment. That now, for our experience, we know that the adherence to therapy is a very challenging problem in the hospitals. From clinic to home, we have seen how RGS solution has evolved to adapt to patient and professional needs. This is a continual process of improvement. In fact, one way to achieve this RGS improvement is through collaborative projects. The Rds Home Project is a project funded by European Institute for Technology through its health program. This project starts in 2019, and the objective of this project is validating the system technical performance and usability in line with patient and professional user requirements, and assessing the acceptability of the system by patient, caregivers, and clinicians. Okay, to reach this objective, we are making a study. This study involves patient, caregivers, and clinicians from 3 different locations: Fundación Sant Jau de Déu in Spain, Limos Hospital in France, Uppsala Hospital in Sweden. Our clinical partners who are testing these solutions. Unlike any project, it needs to be sustainable over time. The solution is not that when the project ends, the solution is not available anymore. So for making this, there are other activities within the project to ensure the sustainability of the solution, like the outreach and commercial activities. These activities are aimed to increase the number of patients and professionals that know about RGS Home, and that eventually will buy the product, hopefully. And Medtronic, that is a multinational organization, is supporting this part, given our experience in commercialization of medical device and solution. Now, Belén will present the result of the solutions. Belén?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Hi, you see me now?
Do you want to share
Yes,
your screen or share my
yes,
screen?
I would like to change
We
the...
Okay,
Yeah,
I changed, don't worry.
great. Thanks.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, perfect.
Belén, will you introduce yourself shortly?
Yes. So I'm a postdoc researcher at IBEC, the Institute for Bioengineering from Catalonia. And I will now present, as Irina said, the preliminary results we obtained from the project RGS at Home. So first, we conducted preliminary study on usability and acceptability of the system. And we evaluated different characteristics based on feedback from clinicians and patients. We received feedback on perceived utility, reluctance for home use, work organization, ergonomy, easy to use by patient, either if it was easy to use by the therapist and to learn, its functionality, and how it related to the motivation of the users, of the patients to use it. And we observed that in most of these characteristics, we got positive feedback, very positive feedback, except for two of them, in which we see that there is room for improvement. And these ones are the reluctance to use it for home use, and how easy it is for the therapists to learn how to use the rehabilitation system. But in general, what we saw was that the acceptability was quite high, reaching 65 points over the maximum 100, and usability was even higher, which that showed a score of 83 points over 100 maximum point. Next, we conducted a usability and acceptability study again, but now we did it through a workshop that we celebrated at 3 different clinical locations, and in which we focused on the analysis of the usability and the interaction of the system, the problems and improvements of the RGS at Home system, and the value that it had for therapists and patients. And we evaluated it at 5 different levels or categories. We looked at the protocols of the system, which means let's say the scenarios for gaming, for training, for the patients, the tracking system, which is the methodology we use for capturing the movements of the patient, and we do it by incorporating a depth sensor. It's kind of a camera that is tracking the joints of the patient's arms, and is able to map them into the movements of an avatar that is showed on screen. Then, we also incorporated 3 more categories that relate to the physical device. So this system, as you saw, has different components and peripherals, and these are also components that need to be evaluated in regards to their how much comfort patients feel when using them, or how easy they are to use by the clinicians to set up. Also, we looked at design and UX, so how the interface of the system is configured and how patients and clinicians are able to interact with the different elements, interactive elements of the interface. And also we looked at other usability related elements. So the type of outcomes that we obtained are the following. In regards to the protocols and the interface, patients stated that it was difficult to return home for maintenance, and sometimes the interface was maybe freezing, or there was an inconsistent smoothness in the tracking system, in how the movements of the arms were tracked and mapped into the avatar movements. And also they stated that the games or the protocols were requiring different poses in order to be used. Other feedback included, for instance, the need for no calibration, which was very positive. This means that there was no need to prepare the system in order to use it properly. So the patients were able to sit and just start playing straight away. And also other feedback, for instance, was related to the materials. Patients and clinicians reported that some of the physical devices presented were not very smooth enough, and this is something we addressed in next versions of the system. Okay, I cannot. Okay, sorry, no. So, okay, next we quantified different metrics related to the usability of the system. And we quantified how much the patients were using the different gaming protocols that the RGS at home system incorporated. We recommended a daily training of about 27 minutes. What we observed is that in this preliminary data that we got, most of the patients exceeded this recommended amount of time per day. As you can see, let's say most of them reached the recommended prescription. Only 3 were kind of a little bit shorter, but almost reached the recommended prescription in average. And the rest either completely reached it or exceeded it, even doubling it. As you can see in the cases of, for instance, this patient that reached double time in average spent daily. This means that some days this patient may have spent 1 hour playing, and other days it maybe spent 3 hours or half an hour. And in average, the total time was 1 hour per day, right? And we see it in other patients. So this was quite positive result in terms of the acceptability of the system and how much the patients liked being exposed to these training scenarios. So when we look at the different games that the RGS at home incorporates, we also see that there is diversity in the preference for using it. So most patients preferred one specific scenario that we call Bricks. It's an arcade game, it's quite addictive. Other patients, in the second place, most patients preferred this scenario, which we call Grasp and Place. It's a scenario that involves not only reaching movements, but also incorporates the need for flexing and extending the fingers of the hands, of both hands. And this is a scenario we have tested with thousands of patients already, and that we see that is quite successful because it's very refined in terms of interaction and design. So as you can see here, the games are ordered according to this evaluation. We did this quantification where the ones on the bottom are the ones that are preferred by patients, and the ones on the top are the ones that were less played for shorter times, let's say. Okay, so next we evaluated the impact of the RGS at home on patients in terms of efficacy. So was the RGS at home system able to boost recovery, motor recovery in these patients? So first we collect the characteristics of the patients, and we see that in average, the patients we recruited for the study where their characteristics were very similar, to those patients we evaluated in previous studies. So next we explored the efficacy of the system in regards to the primary and secondary outcomes. These are outcomes that we assess using clinical standardized scales in the hospital. So clinicians were involved in the study and were evaluating the patient's capabilities to use their upper limbs by using the Fugl-Meyer scale. This scale is a widely used scale for evaluating motor function in stroke. So also we used another scale that relates to the patient's performance in performing activities of daily living. And also we incorporated a questionnaire that the patients had to fulfill to indicate their quality of life, items related to quality of life. And finally, we also evaluated the level of depression. So what we see is that in the patient's ability to perform reaching movements that are coordinated in terms of speed, we see an improvement that is significant in the patients that were exposed to the rehabilitation gaming system at home. And this is an improvement that we do not observe in the control group. When we compared both groups, we detected a significant difference between both in terms of pain, as collected by the Fugel-Meyer scale I described before. So the RGS, the patients that were exposed to the rehabilitation gaming system showed a decrease in their perceived pain related to the upper extremities. These are preliminary results, and we are still collecting more data from patients, so we will increase the power of these results. So next, what we do is we extract from the system information that is relevant for describing the impairment of the patient. So how do we do this? So we take information from the depth camera that is tracking the movements of the patient's arms. And also we take information from the interaction of the patient with the system, and we derive measures that describe the patient's impairment. So we can derive many measures, and combining all of them, we can kind of achieve a fingerprint of the patient's impairment. We apply these methods to achieve this fingerprint, and then we check whether we are able to use this fingerprint in order to predict or estimate which would be the score that a clinician would give to the patient if he would be evaluated or she would be evaluated at the clinic. So this is what I'm showing here on the right panel. We are comparing the estimates that that our model is providing us, that this fingerprint is providing us, and we are comparing them to the real evaluation that clinicians did at the hospital, and we see a close correspondence. Our statistical evaluation shows quite positive results with an R-squared of 0.7 and very significant results for this comparison. So we are able to use the system's information in order to evaluate the patient's impairment with quite good accuracy. Next, we evaluate the capabilities of the RGS wear, the watch that the patients were wearing, in order to capture the amount of use of the arm, the amount of use of the arm that the patient is doing in activities of daily living, the paretic arm, of course, and also to evaluate the patient's motor function. So in this preliminary analysis, in which we were validating the smartwatch capabilities and the software we integrated in it, we compare activities of daily living that required low use of the arm, medium intensity level of using it, and a high intensity level. So just to get an idea of what these three categories mean, in the low intensity activity of daily living, we would have activities such as using the laptop, right, or sitting on the sofa, just watching TV. In the category of medium intensity level, we have activities such as brushing the teeth. And in the activity of high intensity, we would have, for instance, cleaning shelves or washing dishes. And as a reference, you can see another category in which we asked users to wear the watch while walking. So as you can see, we are able to capture the amount of use in these three different categories in a way that seems coherent, because in those activities of daily living that required high intensity use of the arm, we see that the watch is able to capture a higher intensity. Also, now if we unpack these categories into the activities of daily living that we analyzed on the bottom plot, we compared here within each of these activities the use of the dominant and the non-dominant arm while using the watch, in this case in users that did not have any neurological damage. And as you can see, in those activities of daily living that are highly intense, for instance, grooming or ordering shelves and cleaning them, we see that the watch is also able to capture differences between the dominant and non-dominant arm. And this is the validation we did to prepare the system for using it with patients, because at the end what we want to achieve is to differentiate the capability of the patient to use the arm when using the paretic or the non-paretic arm. So it seems that the watch and the software we implemented and we incorporated in this smartwatch, the RGS Wear, is able to capture arm use in activities of daily living. But we also evaluated the ability of this software that we created to capture the level of function of the patients. And for this, we incorporated a task in which we ask patients to draw circles over an horizontal surface. And they do it while using the left arm or the right arm, right? So the paretic and the non-paretic, which will be corresponding. And we see that we are able to reconstruct the paths of the hands of the patients while using the smartwatch. So we are able to reconstruct the movement of the hand, and therefore we are able to evaluate the patient's ability to perform the activity. And finally, we also evaluated the usability of the RGS Wear using different categories related to the typical interaction they would have with this device. So for instance, we evaluated their ability or how easy it was to charge it, to charge the battery of the watch, to switch it on, to wear it, to put it on, to put it off. Also to open the application that it contains using the screen of the watch. Also to engage into the exercise that I described before, performing a circle, drawing a circle over an horizontal workspace, space. To unblock it, also to access the app that is synchronized with the smartwatch, but that is in the phone of the patient. To navigate this application, and also to comprehend the graphs that we are delivering to the patients about arm use and level of function through the smartphone. And what we saw is that the feedback was quite positive. Patients agreed that all these categories, most of these categories were quite easy to achieve, except for opening the application and engaging into the exercise, in which they reported that it was a little bit difficult to do it. This was something expected because, of course, they are not able to use freely both hands, and this is a bimanual task. But this is something we also took into account for the design of the watch, since it's not required for using it successfully, but we still incorporated these activities in the usability test. Also, they reported some difficulties in accessing the app on the phone and navigating it on the phone. But again, these are two activities that are not really required for using the RGS Wear successfully. Okay, so these are the main results. I think now we will continue with Santiago. I will stop sharing the screen.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi there. Yes, now I can share. So let me set this up. So you should be seeing myself here, and you should be seeing the screen that I'm going to use to make a demo of the RGS Workstation. Are you seeing that now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we see it.
Yes. Okay. So I'm Santiago Brandi from Iran, and today I'm going to make a demo of RGS, the rehabilitation gaming system, of which Belen just presented the preliminary scientific results. So let's start with the components. This is the RGS Workstation. So here we have Microsoft Kinect Azure, which is a sensor, an infrared camera that tracks the body movements of the patients. Then that information is sent here to the computer. It's here. So the camera sends information to the computer that runs the VR scenarios for rehabilitation. On the front, we have the touch screen. so that patients don't need to use a mouse and a keyboard, because sometimes stroke patients struggle using those peripherals. Here we have an arm support to perform, let's say, to rest the arm while we are performing hand exercises. And this is the lip motion sensor, also an infrared component, infrared sensor to track hand fine movements, right? And now let's move into the demo itself. So this is the screen that patients see when they start applications. It's very simple, just two big buttons that are My Replication, in which patients can do the routine prescribed by the therapist for that day. And then they have a training bonus, which is, you know, free training. They can do whatever they want from the prescribed exercises. So this is what a routine would look like. All the exercises that the therapist prescribed for the day. The patient knows what's the total amount of the routine, and then you see like the metro stations, you know, all the different protocols prescribed for the day. But let's take a look at the free training so we can pick a couple of exercises to show you. So first of all, in the upper side of the screen, you see that there are different labels, which are the categories for the rehabilitation protocols. We have three, which are hand rehabilitation protocols, upper limb rehabilitation protocols, and full body rehabilitation protocols. And the upper body protocols are divided into two classes, which are the non-gravity ones. So these are exercises that patients, for patients that cannot lift the arms on the air, they have very weak shoulders, normally more acute or severe patients. So these patients need to work in resting the arms on the table, that's sliding the arms on top of the table. And then we have the gravity protocol or against gravity protocol, in which patients can perform this type of movements, so they work against gravity, right? So let's start, for example, with these hand rehabilitation protocols, demolition. So here, first we have a screen that tells us that it detects that the sensor is connected, then we can continue. All of this is very optimized for user experience, for patients to use the system at home. So everything is there's only one flow to go. Instructions are very clear, buttons are very present and salient. And as I said, no mouse, no keyboard. All right, so I can these are the instructions, I can tell you myself. So the game will start until we place our arm on top of the sensor. When it gets detected, then the protocol starts running. So this is a pronation, supination, rehabilitation protocol. So pronation, supination is this movement. This is pronation, this is supination. So here the goal is that patients
Santiago,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but what we are seeing on our screen is like a message
Yeah,
that
here we
have
go.
up.
We don't see the protocol.
We don't see the protocol at the moment.
We see the keyboard. Okay.
Now?
No, we see the keyboard with the explanation.
Yeah, okay. It's weird because I do see the protocol. Let me change something here. One sec. Let's see. What about now? Is it working? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for that. So as I said at the beginning, so the system gets paused when the user does not have the hand on top of the sensor, so that's paused. When I place my hand on top of it, then the system goes back to run, right? And the patient has to do this pronation, supination movements to get a bone in the palm of the hand, and then a supination movement to release it. And the goal here is that we don't let these cubes to pile up so high that we lose. Let's say when we get to 6 floors piled up, we lose. So we have to try to destroy as many cubes as we can, as faster as we can. So this is a gamified or gamification component. Then the more therapeutic component comes when we work with the different control sliders that we have left and the right. Then you can see that they adapt automatically to the patient's condition. So for instance, we have here these supination and pronation controllers. So when the supination controller is at 90, is the easiest. And that means that when I turn my hand to 90 degrees, the bomb is released. So that's a very short movement that the patient needs to do, right? If the algorithm or the therapist decides to make it harder for this patient, so this is 90. If the therapist or the algorithm decides to make it harder for the patients based on the performance, this slider could get up to 180 degrees, for example. Here in the left, right, and the right bottom part of the screen, I'm moving the slider. So now I pick up the bomb. Now 90 degrees, the bomb will not get released until I get to 180 degrees, right? Let's try it again, 90 degrees, nothing happens until I get to, well, I won this level. Now I'm going to the next level. Basically, the paradigm is the same, but we are just adding new gamification components, right? So, for example, now I have to last for 3 minutes. Then different type of cubes appear. For example, this TNT, that when you destroy that, all the adjacent cubes also get destroyed, and so on. So the idea is that around the let's say the principles of rehabilitation, we build different levels so that patients adhere and don't get bored and are motivated, right? So as you see, this is a first-person perspective. This is one of the main principles of RGS, so that the observation of the movements the patient does stimulate the mirror neurons in the brain, and this helps to speed up the rehabilitation, the functional recovery. So let's move on to another exercise. Now here at the end, I have my ranking. So I just made a record here. All right, let's now take a look at clean the table protocol. So, and the user is given a short explanation and the duration of the task for the day. Okay, so the goal here is to remove all the cubes from the table. So I see that it's a bit laggy on the screen share. So here, basically, those virtual arms are just, following my movements. I can see that you see it with a bit of delay because I'm seeing it myself. Normally, it's a lot better flow. Yeah. So one of the good things about this protocol is that it forces the patient to move the arms as much as they can to cover all the surface that they can. So different tables have different shapes, which forces patients to do more lateral movements or movements to the back of the table or movements more towards the user to the front of the table. Here also the way in which the algorithm adapts is by changing the size and the shape of the table so that patients basically, are kept at a stable point of around 70% accuracy and performance, which is the studied value for also for video games, in which is the percentage of performance that obtains more, that generates more motivation and adherence from users. Because if it's too easy, patients will get bored. If it's too hard, they will get frustrated. So 70% appears to be the sweet spot. So the algorithms are always trying to keep the patients around that level of performance. Okay, so I can also skip the tables myself if in case, for example, I know it got too hard or I just did that table too many times and I'm bored, so I can just skip it myself. All right, let's move on. Second place, not so bad. Now let's take a look at a full body rehabilitation protocol. So here I'm going to show you a protocol in which I have to use also my upper limbs against gravity, but I also have to use my body. I have to lean my body to the sides to control the protocol I'm going to show you now. This is a road trip. Again, I receive the instructions and it lets me know how much it's going to last. right? So I have this card and this rock, and by leaning to the sides, I can control the movement of the card here, right? By the way, I could do this as I'm now sitting down. I can also do it standing up. We don't need to change any configuration. It's just it adapts to patients that perhaps you want to work on transferring the weight from left to right. This is something that a lot of stroke patients need to do, right? Or you can, for example, treat patients in a wheelchair that cannot stand up, but you want to work on the balance and core control. Okay, also very interesting here is that what the therapist can do, which if the therapist is not there, it's done by the algorithm automatically. The personalization algorithms is to play with all these parameters you see on the screen. So for example, with these sliders, I can control how high the sphere, the different goals and the stars are here on the game. So they were very low right now. Let me just block the automatic adaptation so I can just control it manually. So now we can see here that stars come very high, so it really demands a lot of shoulder work, right? So if the patient is doing very well and the automatic adaptation algorithm is enabled, it will ask more and more until the patient reaches that 70% accuracy level, and then it will stay there and improve if the patient is improving, and otherwise it will not get harder and harder. The other slider we have here is the density of elements. So this is not working on the upper limb, but it's adding a lot of goals and obstacles to the scenario, which makes you work more on, let's say, attention. For example, you have to avoid this rock, otherwise you will lose what you have collected. Let's see, let's try it. Yeah. And being so many more, let's say, obstacles and elements on the way, you start working more on your executive function, sorry, right? Like you have to avoid something, then you have to turn to get what you want to get. For example, here this is a ramp that gets you many different goals, all right? And then we have these horizontal bars, sliders here that all are also controllable by the therapist, which are the sensitivity of the sensor to the movements of the user. For example, if I put it on left, so this is very low sensitivity. This means that I have to do very ample movements of my body to get the card to move left and right, right? So this is for patients that do have certain core control and can really lean to the sides with no problems. If we would want the opposite, for example, we could increase the sensitivity to max, and it could be even used for patients to do neck control because it's so sensitive that I can control it only by using my head. So this, for example, for stroke patients, but also in cerebral palsy patients, that they have a lot of problems controlling the neck, the head. It's very loose. This is very useful for this type of patient as well. Get it to the middle. And then we also have a slider that can help us to distribute the workload, right? So normally with stroke patients, you do want to work by manual work, which is training, which is using both hands, because it's very important for coordination, and that's real life. But perhaps you want to put a bit more load work for the paretic arm, the ones that need training. So for example, you can just balance that, for example, 80-20, as I just did. And that means that for every 2 elements I will have to catch with my right hand, I will have to catch 8 with my left one. Just pretty intuitive, right? And the good thing is that, for example, let's say in the first session, the therapist and the user and the patient are doing this at the hospital. The therapist, can personalize this if she or he sees fit. And then if you, finish your session, next time, next week or next day, if the patient logs in and starts this protocol, everything would be as saved in the last time. So there's no need to do that again. So either if the therapist personalizes the therapy or the algorithm personalizes the therapy, after the first session of adaptation, then the thing just goes with the user and remembers where it was left to pick it up. And now let's see at, let's say, the counterpart of this. So this is the part for training. Let's take a look at what the therapist can do with the data collected by the system, right? So this is here. This is the MIMS, the Medical Information Management System. This is what therapists use to prescribe protocols. So to prescribe the routines, to prescribe which days and which intensity of training they want for patients each day. And also where they can see what's the patient progress. So with all the activities that the patient does, at every frame we are recording the joins of the patient, right? And also the events on the games, success, failures, response speed, etc. So with all these parameters, then we can create these reports. For example, one of the metrics is the distance covered by each hand. So this is, for example, if I'm moving my arms, if I was painting a line on the space, this is how long that line is at the end of the protocol, right? So it reflects amount of activity, and we can see it divided for left and right hand, right? So here, for example, this is a man. This is with a left parenthetic side. So as you see, everything is anonymous. It's anonymized, so there are no conflicts with GDPR. And here we see that this is, for example, actually quite good because it's improving, and the left hand is not so far left behind, right? Actually, in some points, the left hand is more active than the right hand. So this is, except for this one, perhaps was not the greatest session, but it looks like a good graph. Here we have a different metric, which is the surface covered. If I'm moving my arms, let's say on the table, is how much area I cover with each hand. Again, divided by left and right. And here they are not so the activity. One of the ways we can use this is, for example, this session where the left hand was way more active, much a lot more surface covered. So let's think what happened in this session because we want more of that, and we don't want more of this, for example, of this, right? So this is a tool not only to assess progress, but also to understand, what's a good session, what's a bad session. Next, we have the elbow range for left and right, So in red, we see what's the, let's say, the minimum, which is, total flexion. This would be 0, which 0 is not, you cannot actually do 0 because of the physiognomy. And this would be 180. So that's the distance between the right and the orange curves. Blue is just the average. So what we want to see here is the maximum difference between red and orange. So this, for example, is a very nice session. It's 7, so it looks like the patient is getting better. This is the same thing, but the right elbow, right? And then we can see the actual score that the patient has in the game, which normally it's more interesting for the patient than for the therapist himself, but it's another point of information. So what we see here is obviously kind of like historic plot. This is the progress throughout sessions from 1 to 8. Then if we go to the bottom, we can see the detailed information for each of these sessions. Let's take a look at one, for example. These are the 8 sessions that the patient has performed. We can see the report of one specific one. And this is a scatter plot. This is, if you would see the table from above, the blue points is where the left hand has been, the right points is where the right hand has been, and the green is where the head has been. So this can tell us a lot of stuff. For example, it tells us that the patient has a compensation tendency towards the left arm, which is the paretic arm, right? It's not really in the center of where the arms are. So this is a compensatory typical pattern, right? The patient, instead of moving the hand, is moving the whole body to compensate for the lack of motion of the arm, right? So this is something that we can see. Another thing that we can see is that the pattern of the movement of the left arm is very different from the right one, right? It's a lot more limited than the right one. Something you would expect from a person with a stroke. It's not symmetrical, right? So something that can be very interesting to do is for example, to compare the first session and to compare it to session number 10 and to overlap these two to see, okay, have the patients, the patterns in the movement change? Is the compensation not so strong? Is the surface of the left hand a bit bigger now? So this is more information for the therapist to see whether the training is, you know, being effective or new strategies should be tried. So with that, I think I reached the end of the demo. Thank you very much, and I will let you guys continue with the webinar.
Thank you, Santiago. That was a fantastic demo. So we're just gonna continue with the agenda. As we have seen, the main RGS users are patients, but also professionals. And as part of the project that we have been presenting, RGS at Home, we have shot a video at Fundación San Joan de Déu, which is one of the hospitals participating in the study. And we have asked the real professionals and patients participating, what do they think? What do they have to say about using RGS at home? So we are going to play a short video where we have collected their testimonials.
Cristina, do you want to share or I share, as you want?
Can you share it, please?
Yes, okay.
Esos sistemas nos ayudan a hacer que el paciente sea más motivado y sea más implicado. La rehabilitación no se acaba aquí en nuestro departamento, sino que continúa en el domicilio del paciente. El paciente toma conciencia de su rehabilitación, se hace en parte responsable de su proceso de rehabilitación y eso nos ayuda muchísimo a nivel de recuperación motora, indudablemente, y a nivel de mejoría cognitiva también.
He perdido la ilusión y pierdes un poco tu autoestima. Tu autoestima la pierdes y te limitas a hacer lo que puedes hacer o lo que te dicen que hagas. Me ayudó a darme cuenta que había interés en que me arreglara mi problema. Había alguien que se dedicaba a que yo pudiera solucionar el problema que tenía en ese momento. Y eso me dio mucha tranquilidad.
Para mí los aspectos más beneficiosos de combinar una rehabilitación convencional con una rehabilitación que utiliza nuevas tecnologías es la adhesión al tratamiento, sobre todo. El paciente se implica mucho más. No solamente recuperamos a nivel motor, a nivel sensitivo, sino que les ayudamos a recuperar la funcionalidad para las actividades de su vida diaria. Para ellos es muy importante, se sienten más útiles. Nos sorprendió porque, aunque eran pacientes de edad avanzada, pues realmente han sabido aceptar la tecnología correctamente. Al inicio hay que educar, ¿no?, al paciente y a la paciente para que sepa cómo usar el sistema, pero sin problema. Después siempre ha sido muy buena y nos han dado muy buen feedback y realmente muy contentos de participar.
Thank you, Rina. So, well, in summary, as you can see, the feedback from both professionals and patients is very positive. What professionals mainly highlight, and sorry if you didn't manage to read the subtitles in English, if there are some non-Spanish speaking persons here, sorry about that, but what the professionals highlight is that RGS at home increases adherence to treatment, and it puts the patient at the center of their own recovery process. And this is very important for what we know, discussing it with the professionals, because it's related to something that we call motivational factor and the relation between the physical recovery and the state of mind of the patient. I don't know if you noticed, but when Belen showed you earlier the data of the patient that they collect, one of the features they had was depression. So this is related to the mental health of the patient. In many cases, patients with stroke are depressed, and thus their motivation for doing any task is low. But because RGS is fun to play with and it is a different activity and they feel like they are in charge of their own rehabilitation, it improves their motivation and then it helps with the recovery. And this particular doctor, Rafael Cirillo, always says that a motivated patient will most likely have a faster and a better recovery. And we also have the testimony of several patients. One of them you have seen on this video. Again, sorry if you didn't manage to read the subtitles. I'm going to summarize what the patient said. He is very grateful because someone is dedicated to his recovery, and this gives him a lot of peace of mind. So it's not only that a physiotherapist would be working with him, as is the usual standard of care, but in this case, there is someone from Iodine team and from the hospital that is helping the patient to set up the system so he can do his own rehabilitation with RGS at home. And again, this is related to the state of mind of the patient, which is a key factor. He said that training with RGS at home gave him peace of mind. So that is beautiful to hear. Another woman participating on the study, although we don't have her on video, but she mentioned that she thinks her progress is just good because she wants to keep putting effort into it. She didn't want to brag too much about it. She's a very nice and humble lady. And the patient recovered to a point that allows her performing her daily tasks as a housewife, and she's very satisfied with it. And she literally said, I never thought I would manage to do it again after her stroke. So we have shown you how RGS technology is helping real patients in the real world. And during this study, we have data showing that. I hope you found this whole talk interesting. Thank you very much for your attention. And now we are ready to take questions. We have quite a lot of time. So I invite all of you to switch on your camera so we can see each other, and don't be shy and ask anything you want. Thank you very much.
Hello, hi, guys. Thank you very much for your great presentation and explain to us what goes on with this project. That it's a very important one because with this type of activities, we bring the science and the technology from the lab to the clinic and possibly to the healthcare system. So those are very, very relevant activities. In fact, though I have a question for Belen. If she's there, I would like to ask her about the relevance of dosage when using this type of technology, because the clinicians are used to prescribe drugs and to have a more pharmacological approach to recovery. So what does it mean to prescribe? We will ask these questions also to the clinicians, but also from a scientific point of view, what does it mean to prescribe and to understand the dosage of neurotechnology given to a patient?
Yes, thank you, Anna. That's a great question. Actually, in the field, this question has been quite controversial for a long time. It was not clear whether more training led to faster or more recovery. And this is actually related to one of the studies we recently published, in which we compare a high intensity training versus a low intensity one. And we see that it makes a difference. So high intensity should be prescribed at all stages post-stroke because it leads to higher improvement at the motor level. The problem is that how do we implement that, right? It's a problem for our healthcare systems because patients cannot attend supervised occupational therapy training or sessions every day since they have stroke till, I don't know, let's say forever and for many hours a day, right? So whatever they need. Our healthcare systems cannot support that. And that's why I think that the rehabilitation gaming system, it could be a game change in these terms because it can provide 24/7 if needed, right? Especially the at-home version that we tested in the study. And that's why also we invest a lot of effort in generating protocols and enough diversity. This is something that Santiago also could talk about, enough variability and diversity in the content so patients can really, let's say, not get bored and go through many different rehabilitation tasks, as you saw, different gaming scenarios with different objectives and different presentations. And it's also related to the results I showed, right? We prescribed 30-minute sessions a day, one session of 30 minutes, or even divided in many sessions. And patients, most of them went farther. So it means I think we are doing great in terms of content. There's always more we can do. And also we have to take into account that this was patients were exposed to the system for 3 months. So if we think about, like a real scenario for rehabilitation, we would need to develop more content because patients should be able to use the system for years. That's the objective, right? So that's, I don't know if that answered your question or if you have any doubts.
Yes, of course, we will need more time to go in depth, and I hope you're there later this morning also with the clinicians. We can pose this type of questions, but also I have another question, if I may, since you were doing research on neurorehabilitation for a long time, and you're the expert on this type of neurotechnology. So how important it is from a scientific point of view that these technologies are developed following science-based principles? And what are these principles? So how do patients understand that this stuff is relevant?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I think that's key. Not only I think it, but we showed it in a publication as well. So for years, this is quite new field, right? Using ICTs for rehabilitation. And the first approach that scientists worldwide had was, okay, let's try something. Let's put a game in a computer and let's do something. Let's take the Wii or, these commercial gaming systems, let's bring them to the clinic. Let's see how the patients deal with them. And this was a good step for starting investigating the field, but it's not enough because what we have shown in our recent publication is that we really need patient-tailored solutions that ground on scientific principles of how the brain works, how the brain repairs itself, and how the brain relearns motor skills. So we compared specific neurorehabilitation systems based on principles to those that are not based on principles. For instance, out-of-the-box solutions for gaming, right? PlayStation or Wii and Nintendo Wii. And what we saw is that those solutions that incorporate more principles in their design are more effective for restoring function, motor function. So it's key to really implement dedicated solutions together with clinicians and with patients. Solutions that are grounded on scientific principles and that support what we call the 3 pillars of neurorehab, that is boosting relearning while also supporting the retention of those skills that the patients relearn and the generalization of those skills. Because at the end, we want to have an impact in the patient's lives and not have patients that are really good at these gaming scenarios, right? But we want them to be able to transfer those skills to their activities of daily living. Yes.
Great, thank you. And in fact, we were learning just yesterday about the mechanism of motor learning by some of the speakers. And I invite everyone now to also make a connection. So let's go back to the lectures that we enjoyed yesterday and also think about what Belen just told us, how important it is to bring these mechanisms from the lab, from the rat models, from the computational models of motor learning to the clinic and to develop new technologies like this project, in fact, is doing right now. But let's see if anyone has a question for us. Christina was mentioning the floor is opened.
Yeah, actually, I have a question for Santiago. I hope he's still connected in his settings.
Hello.
Hi, Santiago. So the demo was great. Thank you very much. I really like seeing both what the patient is seeing during the training sessions and about the dashboard that the professional sees. I would like to know how the professional can monitor several patients at once, because we always say that with this system, we help professionals increase their efficiency so that they are more, well, basically they make better use of their time. So could you show a bit, not only the overview of one single patient, but how a professional could monitor and overview several patients at once?
Yes. So, do you want me to show it on the computer or just to explain it?
Whatever you find better.
I think that explanation is enough because so what we saw before is just one patient. So the idea is that therapists can have a list of patients. So, for example, perhaps the hospital is treating, I don't know, 50 patients at the time. So they will have, you know, a list of 50 patients. The thing there is that, you know, a list of 50, it's a big list, right? You cannot go through each one to see what's happening. So the idea is to have a dashboard with traffic color code, so yellow, red, and green, to have, you know, a quick overview of what's happening with patients. So, you know, patients with green are patients that are following the program as prescribed, you know, plus 80%, let's say. Then with yellow, you could have patients that are, you know, kind of adherent, you know, below 80%, but above 50%. And then with red, you could have patients that are just not following the programs. And so those are the patients that, you know, you need to worry about now. So through the system, the therapist could just send them messages, change the prescription programs, looking at the data to understand what's happening. Perhaps, you know, the movements seem okay, but the scores are very low. So the patient is getting frustrated because it's not getting enough scores and so on. There's enough points and so on. So that's a bit the idea, to go from the macro to have an overview of the dashboard. Very basic color is a code. Focus on those that need more, you know, more attention right now. And that's the way in which we can optimize, you know, their work. They don't have to go through all the patients. They just need to know, you know, which patients need attention now.
Yeah, that's great. Can the professional adapt the intensity of the training or those settings that you were explaining before? Can they do it in remote?
Yes. So they can create a routine for each day. So Monday to Sunday, they have, you know, all the protocols available, and they can decide, you know, which protocols are made each day and in which order you want the routine. Perhaps you want a routine, one day that's very, very intense, then you have a day of rest, then very intense again, or whatever combination you may want. So you have completely total flexibility to determine, you know, how many protocols, how many minutes each protocol, how many times a day, how many times a week. You can also see from the reports at what time of the day they use it. So, you know, some people will be inclined to do it in the morning, some people at the afternoon. There's a lot of variability there. So the idea is that we are now working on the implementation also on messaging for the patient. So, you know, if you know that a patient is more prone to do stuff in the morning, perhaps a motivational message is more effective in the morning than in the afternoon, right? So perhaps that patient, you tell him, at 10 a.m., hey, don't remember to train, right? So at the end, I think it's all about just giving the information to the therapist so that they can make the better decisions.
Great. And how do you think the professionals are taking this new system for themselves? Like, do you think it's easy for them to start using the dashboard to learn how to interpret the data? Because it's very different from the standard of care treatment. So do you think there's good acceptability from the clinicians?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's different from the traditional approach, yes, because it uses data. So it's right because, for example, Fugel-Meyer scales like physiotherapy standard scales are subjective. So it means that patients have to perform a list of tasks, and the therapist is going to scale them. It's going to say, oh, this is an 8, this is a 10, right? So this is a traditional approach, which is subjective, which has a lot of shortcomings. Well, first of all, the quantification is kind of depending on the person who does it, and also it's very time consuming. So I think that yes, there's a little time of learning to learn to use the tool, but it's very intuitive. We made it so it's very intuitive because we know that therapists don't have the time to do more work than what they do. They're already so busy with the amount of patients they have. So everything is very intuitive. Like in 20 minutes you learn how to use it, or even less. And I think that at the end, all the data is for them. So it gives them more tools. So after those 20 minutes, that learning process, they use it because it's a lot more useful than having nothing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fully agree. Okay, I don't want to have all the attention, but if there are no more questions, I can continue. Okay, so just one last one for Santiago or Belén. So related to daily tasks, when a patient had a stroke, they lose functionality in general in their daily life, and just finding their way around the house is a challenge. And most of your protocols seem a lot of fun to play with. They are really like video games or serious games. But do you have any protocols that show real daily task performance? For example, I don't know, tidying up a kitchen or scenarios of the real life?
So I can answer the technological aspect if Belén wants to share a bit of the scientific experience. So this is something that we get a lot from therapists, because therapists are trained and are educated with this approach of activities of the daily living, because the theory is that then this can be more easily transferred to the home environment, right? If you are working with, I don't know, with a spoon on the virtual world, then it will be easier to work with a spoon in the real world. So the scientific principles behind RGS are agnostic of this, right? Like they are perhaps on the base, so it's not necessary to actually use an object of daily activities to conform with the principles that have the scientific effect and the clinical effect. But at the same time, maybe from a product development perspective, I understand that users as therapists, this is what they like and what they believe in. So we can also provide those kinds of scenarios, but not because they're scientifically more valid, but because it's part of the type of rehabilitation that is being done today. And although we are proposing a new paradigm, our principles can be also applied under that context.
Yes, so just to add on what Santiago said, it's exactly what Santiago said. Clinicians tend to offer this type of rehabilitation approaches, and their intuition is quite good, because actually that's where you want to have an impact, right? And occupational therapy, that is the most extended approach for recovery of the motor function in the upper limbs, focuses not only on regaining motor, let's say motor function, okay, at the level of at a low level, at the level of structure, okay, but it also focuses on allowing the patient to be independent, whatever it needs, right? for instance, changing the way he was performing certain tasks, right? Using different tools, allowing for compensation. This is part of what occupational therapy is. For instance, if a patient is not able to cut a piece of meat using a knife, then why not using scissors, right? If this gives independence to the patient, then at certain point, maybe this is what the patient needs to learn, to apply strategies, maybe using different tools, maybe performing the same task in a different way, right? What we have seen is that for a long time in literature and in our clinical practice, we have thought that patients cannot regain motor function at a low level beyond 3 to 6 months post-stroke. And this is how our healthcare guidelines is approaching the problem, therefore, right? If you're a stroke patient that is beyond 3 to 6 months post-stroke, then better to learn to compensate for those impairments because you are not going to be able to solve them. And what we have shown in a recent publication is that if you put together a lot of data from recovery, you see that that's not actually true. This critical window for recovery does not close that early. It extends beyond even 1.5 years post-stroke. So they still can regain function at this very low level, at the structural level. And for this, we really don't need to allow them to learn strategies and compensate and so on. We really need them to be exposed to tasks that incorporate these principles of motor learning. These are principles of motor learning, of how the brain learns, how all brains learn, right? I mean, if you want to learn to play an instrument, what do you need? A lot of repetition, right? Repeated exposure. You need variability, right? You need an embodied practice. You need feedback. These are principles of how the brain acquires knowledge. And if you implement tasks that incorporate those principles, then you are supporting recovery at this very low level of function. That is the level that transfers better because it's very close to how our joints are synchronized, right? And our muscles are being contracted in an ordered, sequential, synchronized way. And also in how we are planning at a cognitive level, a task, how we are extracting affordances, how we at the cognitive level extract how we can operate with a specific object, from where we can grab it and so on, right? So that's why we preferred to stick to this approach of incorporating the principles in tasks that do not necessarily need to represent activities of daily living. Yes.
Yeah.
I could talk a lot about it because I love the topic, but I think that was enough.
No, just to reinforce that idea, I just realized while I was actually asking you the question that one of the testimonies we heard from the female patient, she said, well, before the stroke, she was a housewife and she never thought she could perform her daily tasks anymore. And after doing training with the, as Santiago said, agnostic protocols, which are not necessarily related to daily tasks, just fun games, she regained function and now she can perform her daily tasks. So that's a very good proof during this study that it works using these type of protocols. So very interesting. Thank you both for your answer.
And also in terms of adherence, right? Like it's very motivating to have the freedom to develop abstract games in which, right, scenarios in which patients can interact with virtual objects in very different ways, right? So it's nice to not be constrained by these activities of daily living that are very specific. Yeah.
Great. So thank you, Belen, and everybody for your interventions. So if there are no further questions, maybe we can close this session and take our break. But please, let's reconvene at 12 o'clock for a lecture, actually, that is connected to all the discussions that we had now, because Dr. Franco Molteni from Valduce Hospital in Italy will talk about technologies and actually neural interfaces that induce brain plasticity. So let's see, I think it's very important that we hear what this experience is in this domain and what the research has been done that will influence in the future how we recover from stroke or any other brain damage. So later on, after that, after Dr. Molteni, we will have Susana Rodriguez from Val d'Hebron, and she will also talk about neurorehabilitation, but from a different perspective. So what are the markers that indicate actually neurorehabilitation that we have to pursue in order to visualize, to improve how we approach neurorehabilitation? So those are very interesting talks. So let's reconvene at 12. And perhaps you can take this as a small or long coffee break or lunch break, but don't miss these 2 lectures. So see you in a little bit.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye, thanks.
Bye-bye.
20.